Hey everybody, it's the Mad Master here. I'm doing a video today, and this video is going to be regarding the recent comments by Alice Cooper about children's transitioning, transgender type of issues as far as affirmative care and so forth. And there's been a backlash against Alice Cooper, who believe on the first album or first two albums he would dress in a dress and stuff on stage, or I'm trying to remember. I like a lot of Alice Cooper stuff, early stuff especially. I saw him concert this past summer. It was awesome. So I had a couple of thoughts about like boomers making comments about this and stuff, and I have come to some new conclusions about this that might rile up some of the more reactionary, really right-wing parts of my audience. That said, I have a nuanced, balanced position and perspective on this. So this is my thought. Okay, so what he said is that this whole thing's a fad, and these kids are doing this stuff, and it's like, I have a few thoughts about that. So growing up, this is just from my direct experience, this anecdotal experience from the 90s, growing up and like seeing people that were LGBT and stuff, or LGB at least. So this is my point. Now imagine this. A lot of people say, well, there are people jumping on this bandwagon, wanting to get transition and stuff. And there's this documentary that came out about this more recently, which did bring up some great points. I forgot what the name was. I watched it. Do Dissidents, the channel, talks about, they interview the people on Rumble and stuff. So they did this documentary, and I agree with a lot of that. I don't necessarily think that, I think it's too, there's a certain point where it's too young to tell, because a kid will go through all sorts of stuff. I was into Star Wars, Transformers, and then, actually I'm still into Transformers and, old Star Wars, but, then heavy metal, as a kid, and Bill calls it toy commercials as far as like the Transformers go. And I was a weird kid, went through everybody goes through phases and stuff, is my point. I wore a dress in high school for like a day downtown just for fun, and I did a little bit of, I almost experimented a couple times. I didn't really go that far, but to whatever. So I'm not into that stuff. I realized like there was a certain point where I was like, I can't do that. I'm pretty straight, So the point being is that a lot of people experiment. A lot of kids don't know their full identity by the time, they're a teenager and stuff. I don't know if 16, 17 would be a good age for a lot of stuff. That's my belief. With some caveats and some, with some caution, some screening for everything, I would say. Actually, that's my opinion, but that's controversial, I know. I just mean for a lot of different stuff, case by case basis. I'm always about case by case. That's like the Northern European way of doing things. It's like parsing out a lot of different things and looking at the nuance. In my opinion, that's the best of what has happened, like in Netherlands and fucking Finland, Sweden, Norway, whatever, anyways. So I'm going to postulate this. So this whole thing, okay, yeah, they're going through this phase. It's a fad, It's cool to be a different gender that than you said, or these, neo-pronouns and all this shit, which is some of it's complete madness, okay? So some of the neo-pronouns, which Hassan Piker won't even, he actually has come out and said, oh, I don't even know, man. I can't even debate it. It's like trying to avoid the subject. So I'm going to say this. I knew a lot of people growing up, or people were around, just around, like, let's say you go to the Chinese restaurant and there's these two women that are very masculine looking, and they start talking about men or something. It's like, okay, well, I guess they're lesbians, but like, if they're, they're holding hands or something and stuff, and you're like, okay, what does this mean? And then there were guys that grew up, playing sissy stuff, doing sissy stuff, playing with Barbie and shit like that, right? So you knew these people, and they were gay or queer or lesbian or whatever. And let's just postulate this is a mind experiment. A certain proportion of those people, okay, maybe not every tomboy or tomgirl should be encouraged. Obviously, they shouldn't be encouraged to transition and mutilate things or take hormones or whatever. Let's just get that out of the way. That should not be the case. I'm sure that is the case for a small number of people. That has been the case. Maybe somehow things have gone that route. Not saying that it's very common, but let's say some of these people that were they were called gay or whatever in the 90s or 2000s or whatever. Let's say a small number of those people were actually trans and they didn't know it at the time. Maybe they don't want it. Maybe they're too old to like change, into whatever. And I'm not saying they should go the full route. I'm just saying, like, as far as like being a fad, I would say that a proportional number of people that identified as gay or lesbian in the 90s or before or beyond for a while are probably might really be trans. And I think that's a missing part of the discussion when you look at the right wing. Some of them are on the left too, like TERFs and stuff. But like if you look at the right wing, you look at the left wing, there is this missing discussion. And I think this is a very relevant, that's the word I'm thinking of, relevant discussion to be made. What proportion of these people actually were, like if they would have come up now, would have been identified as trans, and then they look back on their past, maybe they won't transition now, but they kind of would identify in the modern social zeitgeist, probably a lot. And it doesn't mean, and it, like I said, it can go this way and it could go the other way, where they're just a tomboy or tomgirl and they do identify as a woman or man. They're assigned gender or sex at birth, and then they there might be cases where they are pushed to the other direction by some weird ultra liberal parents or something like that, right? Or some shrink that not a John Money kind of shrink, if you look him up necessarily, but just someone's like, oh, go with your feelings. Oh, are you sure? It's like leading questions. It's like, a lot of like police psychiatrists will interview a murder suspect like Brendan Dassey or something and leading questions, and they get found as guilty even though they probably didn't do anything. Like in the the Making a Murderer Netflix case, in Wisconsin, here in Wisconsin. So this is just kind of something that I've thought about. Yes, that could be the case with some of these people that transition or want to transition, but it could be the opposite too. It could go the other way, is my point, because people are complicated, okay? People are very complicated. Sexuality is more complicated than anybody on the right or left will ever think, very complicated, or many people, most people, ever think about. So, like, that's why I'm I sound like Wisconsin. Speaking of Wisconsin, that's why I'm so, adamantly libertine about many sexual matters, is because when you're repressing or suppressing certain things, certain expressions, or certain ideas, I find it very dangerous, and it can lead to other bad things in the world and with regards to that subject. That's my opinion. So when we're talking about this subject, I think it's way more nuanced and way more complicated than someone would say, than some, oh, well, and then the whole excuse is that you don't want kids to transition, you don't want to, and the women's sports thing, which I can identify with that. I can empathize with that point of view pretty much. I don't want 10-year-olds to be able to take hormones or puberty blockers necessarily, or for that matter, the women's, if you think there's no difference between men and women's physiology at a certain point, you're an idiot, But with regards to like whether or not it's a fad or whether or not it's just like people that wouldn't transition normally. I think there's more nuance to be had with that, and that's my point in this video, is because I think there are more situations where there is a gray area and there is this room for maneuverability within this kind of realm, because I think people have a lot of different thoughts about their own gender and sexuality. As for me, I'm straight, you know. I'm you know, and I also identify as a man, and I you know, identify, I'm a man, him, his, you know, I am though, you know, that's how I identify. And the more masculine I feel, the better I feel. It's usually how it goes with that, you know. If I feel very unmasculine, and you know, sometimes stoicism is good. You know, that's something that right wing is saying, is like, sometimes stoicism is good. It's toxic masculinity, but sometimes it's a good thing. You know, I'm wearing the Terminator gargoyle sunglasses, you know, from 1985, or whatever, you know, that Arnold Schwarzenegger wore in the movie. I mean, they're the same model, a different color, but you know, I'm very into masculine things. You know, I have a fucking Manowar tattoo, for Christ's sake. You know, I mean, so I identify with that stuff, and the better I feel, the more carefree I feel, the more masculine I get. I notice that too. Like, the less in my head I am, the more. So I'm definitely masculine as fuck, but maybe not enough sometimes, obviously. But yes, I don't think we need to judge people in the matter of, say, they're following a fad necessarily. And Alice Cooper is a boomer. He's old, you know. Someone said, "Oh, I hope he dies soon." The boomers, yeah. Well, he's pretty healthy. I don't think he's gonna die soon. So he's singing like he did 20, 30 years ago. So I don't think he should be criticized. But you have a conversation, you know. Well, do you think it's all a fad? I don't think it's all a fad. I think there might be a proportion of it that could be, though. But I don't think it's all a fad. I think people, like I said, back in the day, you knew these people. You knew these people, like, oh, you know, Tammy, and I'm just making up names. You know, she's on a basketball team, and I'm just saying, like, she didn't wear makeup or something, just to say. She doesn't wear any makeup, and her face is kind of like, just has this, like, masculine thing about her. This essence that's very masculine. Oh, she's a lesbian. Okay. Well, okay, that's fine. You know, or she's a police officer. No, I'm just kidding. That's a stereotype. That's a joke. You know, she's gay and stuff, and that's fine. But if she were coming up now, maybe she would identify as a man and want to transition, because it's a big step, maybe. And I'm not saying all people that are in that position will want to. I'm saying there's certain people that back then they didn't have that outlet. They were just like, okay, I'm gay or I'm a lesbian, you know. And that outlet was not there. It was like way more seen as way more freakish too, you know. There was androgyny, you know, like in the 70s were really big on androgyny, but 80s and 90s not so much. And well, no, there was a lot of androgyny even in the 80s and 90s, well, mainly 80s, but 90s everybody wanted to look like a schlub because like grunge and is alternative. But so I mean, because it was too 80s to wear makeup. We gotta look like a slop job on stage, you know, because we're down to earth. But yeah, so I'm just making fun of the 90s again. It's like, so I get to do that. So no, I don't think everybody that back then would identify as just gay or lesbian or whatever, bi or whatever. Now, I think there would be more people identifying as trans, or maybe even these other things, which I am mixed on the other things, but you know, nevertheless, I think that's the case. I think that's the truth. Growing up how I did, seeing people, like you'd go to like I said, a Chinese restaurant, these women were complaining about men. They're totally masculine. And then there's the top and the bottom thing, you know, maybe the guy would transition or something now with the bottom, you know, or maybe some of them would, you know, maybe some of them did identify that. They didn't have a category that was as accessible to go into back then, because it was a big deal if you were into that, you know. And that doesn't appeal to me, the aesthetic of of that. I am definitely cis and straight, you know. So I'm not into that whole thing. That's, you know, that's fine. If you want to judge me on that, that's fine. But I think that there's a number of people that would have gone to these other categories if it were a more accessible thing back then. And they didn't know, they didn't have the communication, even like the LGBT culture back then did not, like, probably didn't have as much of a prominent transgender community back then. So it was easier to go into those categories. So I think that's a number of those people, period. I think that's why the number is larger now, in part. And then there is probably a maneuverability, a room for people. You know, there's a lot of debate on how many people transition or start to and regret it or something. You know, there's a lot of debate about what categories you use for that and stuff. I think there is a number of people that jumped on it because of being a fad. But I think that Alice Cooper, you know, he's old. He grew up in the, you know, 50s, 60s. He doesn't know about a lot of this stuff. You know, he's not as cued in to some of that stuff. He's pretty conservative socially too. He's a fucking Christian, you know. So, and he's a Republican too. So I mean, him saying that is just, you know, I don't see it as bigoted. I see it as more naivete about how these things are working in a way. If you don't add that nuance, that's what I'm trying to say. So it's kind of a moderate centrist position on the subject, which I do have. I do have more of a moderate position on this than, oh my God, let's ban transitioning for adults, like Matt Walsh, his stupid ass says sometimes, or what is his name? Michael Knowles said that or something at a conference for shock value or something. And then I'm not like, let's transition 6-year-olds. It's great. It's I'm not like that either. I think that both sides are fucking obnoxious, and we need to come to a middle ground. And I think that middle ground is acknowledging there might be partly a fad that people are jumping on this, you know, defining themselves by all these, especially neo-pronouns. There's no denying neo-pronouns are a fucking fad. There's just no denying it. But the trans thing being a fad, it's maybe in part because it's kind of tied in and lumped in with all that stuff. So maybe some people are doing that because, you know, they have some really liberal psychiatrist that diagnoses them as having dysphoria, and then they go and get it because they're just depressed or autistic or whatever, like that they've been said. It's been said, but there's a lot of people that would have identified back in the day. Guarantee it. Back in the day, they would have identified as trans, but they went into the lesbian or gay categories. That's what I am saying. That's about all.